Is really interesting. People become so automated and unconscious in their eating patterns because they've been programmed to be quite specifically emotionally attached to their food. One part of that is just our identity is so attached to, well, when I wake up, I need my coffee, and that's just such an automated pattern. But what it's actually doing a lot of the time is anything in opposition is just so confronting and so unfamiliar and really just quite difficult.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching our videos. If you'd like to support us some more, you can explore our homemade natural skincare products at purelytallow.com. Thank you so much for supporting my small business. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm Serena, and today my special guest is Natalie West. Natalie is a returning person, a returning guest here on our show, and I'm so excited to have you back.
Thank you. It's been ages. I looked actually through my emails a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, it was 2022.
I know. That feels like a really long time ago now.
It does. It's just, I think the last kind of 4 years has just disappeared into some vortex somewhere.
Time goes by so stinking fast. Okay, Natalie is an integrative psychotherapist that specializes in nutritional psychology. And so we're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to talk about the brain and how food affects it and nutrition, because I think most people really don't realize that the foods they're eating are not only affecting their weight and their health, but that it affects their brains.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very big missing piece of the puzzle that really doesn't get spoken about a lot. And also too, the other part of that that's also missed out, Serena, is that heart, brain, gut coherence, which is also connected through our nervous system. So that's also really important too.
Yeah, so important. So what made you, as a doctor, what made you realize that so much of our mental illnesses that people are having are related to our gut health, our health in general, and our vitamin deficiencies and our nutrients that we're eating? What made you realize that as a doctor and kind of decide to specialize in that?
So I'll just reframe to more. I'm more of a psychotherapist, so not a technical doctor as in a GP, anything like that, just so for people to get clear on that. So it was really around 20 years ago when I started my journey with my studying, and my mentor that I worked with, he was a psychotherapist and also a clinical hypnotherapist at the time, and he was also specializing in what was called back then psychonutrition, they called it. And he actually had said to me, if you think that you can talk to a starving brain or talk to someone constantly about their feelings or what's happening in their life without addressing actually what they're also eating, you're never actually going to get to, really the deep root cause. Because even back then, 20 years ago, that was quite weird. So, for people coming to me and I'm saying, hey, yep, you've got anxiety or depression, or, you've got things going on in your life and, self-image conflicts with yourself. But I would ask people, what do you actually eat? And you'd get a lot of crazy looks, because that was definitely not something that was pretty standard, and it's still not, to be honest. If we talk about the psychology world, most psychologists don't ask anyone what they eat, and it's more around the head, and it's kind of separating the head from the rest of the body, which is really not how it works. We've got to address heart, brain, gut, all the nervous systems, and also to the food that we actually eat also has a vibrational state which actually affects that. So that's really where my journey started. And, now I'm 5 hours away from finishing my certification in nutritional psychiatry. So, that's kind of where I'm at now. And it's just such a passion. And even it's funny, actually, I've been communicating with Georgia Eid on and off for a couple of years. And, even she said to me, like, wow, you were asking those questions 20 years ago, even before, she even really understood what that was. So it's so amazing, to have contact with amazing humans like her as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that this space that we're in, this community, the carnivore community, the health space in general, people are just always so giving and so willing to give advice and to help people. I think we all realize that this is a place where people are lost. And because the information that we get from the actual organizations is so tainted by big money and big pharma and big food, that it's so hard to get that correct information. And so we're all willing to come together and work on this together for the greater good.
100%. And I think the biggest thing too, we're so conditioned to be in that mainstream, because mainstream is led to be comfortable and safe. And, a lot of that authority as well that mainstream has, and really what that does, it really disempowers people. And that's what I see every single day, where, you've got this authority figure in front of you that's not really empowering someone to take control of their mental and metabolic health, and, having a balanced or moderate diet. But, when you look at someone, their moderation and balance is really not working for them, both mentally and metabolically. But then you've also got this fear of, and again, it's a normal human trait of, being safe in the crowd. But, stepping away from that takes courage. But when you do, you're stepping out into the unknown and away from the mainstream, which exactly is what we've experienced, right? We've had to go through our own journey of stepping away from what we've been really hypnotized into believing, because our minds are very suggestible, whether or not it's external suggestibility or internal suggestibility. So we've got to be really mindful about where we're suggesting ourselves as well, which is also not serving us.
Yeah, and it's interesting, on a different note, the same people who are eating breakfast at Dunkin' Donuts every day and getting those, large coffees that are mostly sugar and not even coffee, those are the same people who don't understand it for humans. They don't understand the havoc that it's wreaking in their bodies, but they completely get it when you go to the zoo and there's a sign up, for please don't feed the monkeys, they need to eat their species appropriate diet. They would never throw a donut into the cage, for the monkeys, but for Americans, they don't think that there's a species appropriate diet. And it has just become so normal. Those kinds of meals, those kinds of treats, those kinds of snacks, those coffee drinks, if they got rid of those coffee drinks, I think most people would be healthier. But there is just so much garbage out there that is not food, and it's certainly not our species appropriate diet. And it's so hard to try to explain it to people, because those same people who would never throw the monkey something at the zoo just eat all kinds of stuff that is not for human consumption.
Well, Australia's the same. It's very much, we follow, I guess, the American, cultural trends. And, when we talk about the culture of our countries, from a food perspective, the messaging at the hierarchy is pretty much, fed down the same way. And you are right. If we look at, protecting, animals in a zoo and giving them their species appropriate, diet, it also comes from the fact that, we're never looked at as a species, but we are, and we really have to understand. But one part of that too, which is really interesting, people become so automated and unconscious in their eating patterns because they've been programmed to be quite specifically emotionally attached to their food, and food in inverted commas, because it's not that, as you just said. One part of that is just our identity is so attached to, well, when I wake up, I need my coffee. And that's just such an automated pattern. But what it's actually doing a lot of the time is anything in opposition is just so confronting and so unfamiliar, and really just quite difficult for once the brain and the body, but also too, if someone has a very automated pattern in choosing those foods, which hold a value at some point, because they've either used the food as comfort or emotion, or, doesn't even matter what country we live in, we've just also been programmed to eat, whether we're happy, sad, indifferent, overwhelmed. We're just eating and really not understanding why we're eating. But a lot of the time when we say, hey, let's look at these, Franken-style foods that I call them, removing them so that we're actually valuing your internal environment, as in your gut, brain, all your organs and your mental health. Unfortunately, no one really has value on that. They have a value that they've been conditioned with all the stimulation that they use through food and dopamine. They're so attached.
Yeah, and you mentioned we're not thinking about why we're eating. We're also not thinking about what we're eating. People just eat, like they see something that looks good, a donut, French fries that have 16 ingredients and they're fried in vegetable oils. And remember when French fries used to be potatoes?
Yes, and in tallow, like, many, many years they used to be cooked in tallow until I think it was like the early 80s, I believe, that when it changed. But you're right, no one actually also is taught, and this is another part of that conditioning, we're just taught that breakfast, lunch and dinner and 500 snacks in between that is normal. It's not. If you look at a species in an animal in a zoo, they eat once or twice a day.
Yeah, and they're not walking around with a sugary snack in their hand all the time.
Well, they're not metabolically unwell.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and there's a chain in the United States called Steak and Shake that just announced they're going to start frying their fries in beef tallow, which is amazing, except the beef tallow is bleached and it's got something in it, and then it also has BHT in it, like as a stabilizer. And Like, and so somebody went in there, you know, an influencer went in there to ask them about the beef tallow and came out with an order of fries and looked it up. And it turns out the French fries alone, not including the oil that they're fried in, have 16 ingredients in them for a French fry.
Count ingredients, people.
And those ingredients are not even food. So they take a potato and they turn it into something that's not even food anymore. You know, like just imagine the idea that that's just okay with you and you're going to eat stuff like that. I love the Frankenstein food. I love that people eat Frankenstein foods all day long, 3 meals a day plus snacks.
Yeah. And really, it's a very unconscious behavior, because if we were really conscious and really understood, hold on, what is this feeding me with, and how am I nourishing myself? Because nourishment also comes from a value structure. So, you know, not really understanding that, you know, what we're not changing, we're choosing. And that's really sometimes quite confronting for people to hear, because again, it takes a huge amount of acceptance and responsibility. But also in saying that, you know, we are so conditioned to be in that comfortability of the tribe. And if everyone else is doing it, well, then I'm going to feel safe and I'm okay. But, you know, that's detrimental long term. And the stepping outside the tribe to do something different, like eat a species appropriate way, takes a lot of emotional regulation, because also a lot of people are very, very, very dysregulated with their emotions and that nervous system. So food is a huge element, right? That's a definite foundation of root cause protocol. But the other part of that is also understanding your nervous system regulation. And most people that eat that way, they're all emotionally dysregulated.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because the mental state of people all over the world in civilized countries is terrible, with things like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, stress, all kinds of things. So what kind of a role does what we eat play into that?
Well, it's everything, because the thing is, you know, when we're looking at food as messengers, so really what we've got to look at is, you know, our body, from our brain to our gut to our nervous system, is all a huge chemical factory. Yeah. So we, you know, again, if we talk about methylation, it's a methylation process in our body that even our mitochondria, what we look at, what we see, what we hear, and also too, how we're conditioned within ourselves and the way we feel about ourselves. So it's a very direct correlation. When someone really honors themselves and has a really high value on themselves, and they know what they're worth and what they're worth feeling, when you go through that process and you get all that regulation going out of dysregulation into regulation, you will never ever choose anything that will take you out of that. So that's, again, a foundational structure where people have to understand, one, how their mind works, two, how their body works, and what the food does through the mitochondria. So, you know, anyone that probably knows mitochondria is our, you know, our cellular structure and our cells that need the energy to create ATP to actually make us work correctly. Now, if we're firing instead of on 10-volt cylinders, which I like to call them, you know, most people are operating on half a battery, you know, but what we're using is the wrong fuel source. So again, ketones and ketosis is one of the most powerful fuel sources for the brain, but the whole entire body. It really is coming back to, well, if I'm doing what I'm doing now, and I've been labeled with depression, anxiety, bipolar, even, you know, long-term schizophrenic disorders, what we've really got to do is go back a little bit and go, okay, what is our programming? Where is our nervous system also dysregulated in trauma? Because it's always a little bit of a, you know, a fine tooth comb of kind of pointing where all of these little kind of things end up. And it always goes back to that 0 to 7 and 7 to 12 years of age with a lot of people. But also too, in that age, that's where we learn how to use food. We learn to use food, especially with women, through, if I eat that, then I'm going to get fat. So then I'm going to use food only purely to make my physicality change, to make me lose weight. If you do this in a species appropriate way and you put your mental and metabolic health first and actually understand your patterning, whether you're conscious or unconscious, you will lose weight by default. But also what I'm saying by that is you've got to get everything into alignment. Inflammation, get your gut being fed correctly. Obviously, if you're coming from a space of very dysregulated gut, hormone issues, you must look at all of those as well. But again, you know, carnivore regulates that for a lot of people. But also too, you've got to regulate your own thinking. So that's one of the other things. Nutrition plays a part because it matters, because again, you've got to eat like your life depends on it. because it does. And again, if you feel like you're missing out on something because you're like, well, this is restrictive, I always reverse it back to people and say, well, would you rather live in restrictive of where you are currently, or get out of that mindset? Because restrictive or, non-sustainability with this eating is all a mindset, because it's very, very, very unfamiliar. But again, everyone must look through the lens, conscious lens. What am I putting in my mouth? And what is this message going to signal to my body? Is this going to serve me because I deserve to be served in a better way? Or is this going to serve me in the way that I've been feeling about myself? So it's really, again, serving you in either way. But one's a high vibrational way and one's not.
And I love the saying, every bite you take is either feeding disease or fighting it. And I think that that's basically what you're saying there. Like, I love that. What signal is what you're putting in your mouth going to send to your brain? So ketosis, for people who don't know, will you tell us what ketosis is and how it benefits you?
So ketosis basically is, for example, if we talk about the two fuel sources that we have, and a lot of that is carbohydrate source. So it could be, white carbohydrate source, vegetable carbohydrate source, because it all converts to glucose. And on the other part of that, we also have what we call zero carb, which again, it's like, well, where do we get our energy from? So instead of using glucose, what we generally do is we bring down that carb intake. Eventually, whether it's low carb or into zero carb carnivore, your body has to adapt to operate from a different fuel source. So effectively what happens is when there is no external glucose or exogenous carbohydrates coming in, your body has to go, hold on, I now need to switch to, which then your liver makes glucose for you through gluconeogenesis, which is really crazy, actually, when a lot of people actually don't even know that our bodies are actually designed to make glucose. And, it will only ever make what you need. It will never give you excess. Like, for example, when you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, because we've been told and led to believe that we need carbohydrates to function. And that's our brain's preferred source of fuel. And I'll always challenge that, because then I'm like, well, hold on, if that's our brain's preferred source of fuel and we reverse that and take that away, then shouldn't we get sicker? We should not get better, right? So that just doesn't sit. It's just, again, it's mainstream authority of, I guess, keeping in that moderation and balance. So when there's no carbohydrates, your body is then forced to create ketones through your blood, which then is a different fuel source that then operates in a much more powerful way, which also reduces inflammation, brain fog. It just, again, it's like a 10-volt battery that your brain operates on instead of a 1, which is what carbohydrates are. The other part of that is also it's very consistent, where your body then needs to convert your fat into fuel. So whereas when we're using those carbohydrates externally, you always overeat, because that's what they're designed to do. They're designed to turn your brain on, which again, blood sugar, insulin, master hormone, getting that as well. That's what ketosis does. It balances your insulin. Depending on where you're coming in from, obviously you're coming in with type 2 diabetes, that's going to take a little bit of time. But effectively what we're talking about is what fuel source are we meant to operate on for ultimate mental and metabolic health. And the other reason why I don't use physical health, because people's minds go externally. When I'm trying to help people understand, this is about your organs. What are you feeding your brain? What are you feeding your gut? Which then also feeds your nervous system. And no one ever thinks about the nervous system. And all of those organs are all connected through the vagus nerve. So protein calms your vagus nerve, and also so does ketosis.
So what about being in ketosis long term? There are some people who say it's not really safe or sustainable to be in ketosis for a long period of time. What do you say about that?
There really is no longevity studies on any way of eating. Again, if we just look at it just through the lens of observational, again, we don't need none of my clients that I've ever worked with need a random controls, RCT to tell them that, hey, what you're doing is, making you feel better. They're like, I don't care. Right. This is how I feel. And I look at observational, N1 experiments, if we want to call it that. But I'll always say, well, what is the long-term outcome of someone, being in a dysfunctional body with type 2 diabetes or mental health issues when we're still eating the same thing and we're not actually getting better? I also just, always question when there's things that are thrown out like that, because I've been 6 years in ketosis, and you know what? I'm not dead. You've been in it a long time.
Yeah. Do you ever cycle in and out? Like, do you ever eat something that you shouldn't eat on the carnivore diet?
No.
Yeah.
because that whole shouldn't thing doesn't come into my mind anymore.
Yeah.
Because I just value how I feel. And, I've got so much going on, and I want to be as present every single time for myself, then my clients and my kids and life, really. I have no desire, because food, and again, it's another thing I teach my clients, is food should never be used as entertainment. And, snacking is always an emotional event. It's something that, we need to regulate. You get to choose what makes you feel your most ultimate self, right? You do that because most people don't even know what that feels like, Serena. They just live in such a threshold of just moping along and getting themselves into this, well, this is my life. And even people that have said they have depression or anxiety, you've just got to live with it. It's like, well, no, you actually don't. But what you have to do is actually jump outside the norm to do that. And that's extremely uncomfortable. And a lot of people in our social circles get very uncomfortable with that. And then what happens is then we become unconscious again, because we're like, what happens if someone says something? What happens if I'm questioned? I'm like, well, you've got to put your mental and metabolic health first before anything else.
Yeah. And I find that if I have conversations with people who, like, I see on a regular basis, but I'm not friends with them, but I see them on a regular basis, and we've had conversations about carnivore, and they sound really interested in it. And then they ask me a bunch of questions, like within another week or so, they'll ask me questions and stuff. And then when I see them after that, they don't really want to talk to me anymore. Like, it's like, and it's not like I didn't start the conversation. I didn't push them at all, but this conversation did happen. And I don't know if it's that they feel bad that they didn't try it. They feel, like, is it that they tried and they gave up and now they feel weird around me? Or do they just think I'm weird? I don't know what the situation is.
I think a lot of the time, people see the carnivore diet, again, everyone generally is coming into the carnivore diet because they see other people lose weight, right? And I think if you only go in on that perspective, that's going to be difficult, because what we actually have to do is change the lens to that and say, you know what, yes, that is a byproduct of being in ketosis, right? It really, really is. The other part of it that we're really missing is understanding this is a mental and metabolic health protocol. This is designed to get your body healed, out of inflammation, and I'll reference a client right now because it's really important based on this conversation. So she had an autoimmune that kept flaring up, and, she'd been on and off for a little while, but I just said, because she did it on her own. And then she came to me and I said, if you're only ever going to use it to think that you need to lose weight, it's not going to work long term, because you're going off and on, because your programming is around, well, if I use it as a diet to lose weight, instead of actually going, hold on, how do I heal my autoimmune? That's a very different way of thinking. And again, what happened, she'd lost weight, but her CRP markers disappeared. So she had a very, very high inflammation marker of arthritis. She's now been 3 months on the protocol and it's down to 0. So, again, she posted a picture of herself and she's lost an amazing amount of weight. But that was not the focus. And it's really interesting. I've had a lot of people call me and they're like, oh, I want the weight loss protocol. I'm like, yeah, that's not how it works.
Yeah. I mean, weight loss is a multi-billion-dollar industry. You go to a place like Sam's and Walmart here in America on the first of the year, like right after Christmas, they line the entire entrance with protein shakes and protein granola and like all these things. All you have to do is eat some steak and some chicken.
And it is very, very simple. And I think a lot of people begin because we're so conditioned to go, well, what about this meal and this meal? And it's like, you've got a lot of unwinding and unconsciousness to go through. But all the women that I spoke to that had reached out to me because of, my clients posting that, when I reflected back to them, it was actually their own internal inflammation and self-worth and self-image that they had to work on, because then you'll never be on a diet and you just use protocol to reset yourself. But again, you get to choose. If you want to go 6 months, and most of my clients around 6 months, 12 months, and on the protocol, depending on where they're coming in from, but they go out and I'm like, you have full conscious choice of what you get to choose. It's not about I shouldn't, I can't. It's like, no, consciously choose. Why are you choosing it? Are you choosing because you feel like you have to, because everyone else is doing it? Because the thing is, if everyone else is doing it, you've got to look at what everyone else is doing and what their mental and metabolic health structure is doing. And that's a really confronting thing sometimes. But I have clients that have added in, broccoli every now and again, and they've come back to me and they've said, actually, this tastes really disgusting. I'm like, there you go. But there's no guilt, no shame. It's just, hey, I'm going to choose. Let me be inquisitive, what happens, and then like, no, don't need it. It's a very different way of operating.
Yeah, and I'll have people say to me sometimes, like, don't you just want to be normal? Like, have you looked around normal lately? I mean, normal is not something I want to be. I mean, if we're going by normal, because the majority of people, because 60 or 70%, I think it's 80% of people are overweight, 60% are obese. I mean, when you look at that, normal people have more than one autoimmune disease. More, normal is being pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. I don't really want to be normal.
No, thank you. And normal is not an achievement,
Right.
but basically what it is, it's comfortability. It's people feeling like, is that inner child of part of us wanting to fit in and not stand out and not do something different. And, but at the end of the day, if you're dealing with a mental and metabolic health issue, you have to move away from that. You have to take your agency back and really own and accept, hey, this is where this has got me. I didn't understand why, but when you do understand, then you have a full conscious choice to say, hey, I get to choose how I want to live in my body versus being in a crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier, when we were talking about the French fries, you mentioned that we used to use beef tallow for stuff like that. You think it was back in the 80s that changed. So let's talk about Ansel Keys for a few.
Oh, lovely.
So for those people who don't know, do you have a quick rundown of who Ansel Keys is?
Yeah. So Ansel Keys was a scientist professor at Harvard. There was 3 of them that were literally, paid really to look at saturated fat versus sugar. And they were paid off, 3 of them, to, I think it was equivalent, was about $1,500 back then, equivalent in dollars in 1950, to basically say that the findings that they found with sugar versus saturated fat, and that all blame went to saturated fat and not sugar. So that's really where the dietary guidelines then started from. And, even if we go back a little bit before that, you also kind of go into the 7-day Adventist protocol as well. They're all hand in hand. They all were in control of that. So really Ansel Keys and his buddies really have destroyed, where health should have gone instead of where it went, and paid by pharma, big food. They're all in bed together.
Yeah, and if you look at the charts, there are charts all over the place. You can Google it and find charts of people, but Americans specifically, and there's probably one for Australia. And you can see our health declining. If we swapped out saturated fats for all those vegetable and seed oils, and they're supposed to be so healthy, why is heart disease worse now when we're eating something like 80% less of saturated fats than it was before?
That's right. And the other part of that too was, the study, the 7-country study, which was cherry picked. So if you go even and look at the data on that, you can very easily clear what was left out and why, and it all makes sense. And you're like, wow. And that's why, when I hear science or, this is what this, study says, I'm like, because really that's where it started. So let's look at who paid for it. And really, it doesn't really matter what kind of nutritional protocol that, we want to say is better than the others. What we've really got to do just is go back and look at history and know that, we've been eating meat since the dawn of day, and yes, there may have been some berries on a tree, but I tell you right now, they don't near taste like anything that the fruit is. All the fruit we have was fruit and vegetables did not exist. They didn't exist in the form that they are. And even with fruit, like it's ridiculously engineered to be so sweet. And our taste buds are getting so used to that, which is, again, that dopamine response. Keys has got a lot to answer for. And his other 2 buddies, I don't know who they were, but
yeah. All of that information can be found online, but you can also find it in Nina Teicholz's book. Nina is one of my favorite people in the whole world. The book is called The Big Fat Surprise. Love it. I've listened to it 6 times on Audible, and every time I listen to it, I'm surprised yet again by something I missed the first, times that I've listened to it. So if you want all that information in an easy to read book about Ansel Keys and about how this whole thing happened for us with nutrition, definitely pick up a copy of Nina's book because it's amazing. So with all of the information that we've talked about today, with everything being said, do you think everybody needs to be carnivore, or do you think some people can just be on a lower carb diet and have the same kind of mental and physical results?
I do. I really think it's empowering them to understand, where they're coming in from, but also too, there is a nuance to that. So for example, if someone's been on SSRIs for a very, very long time, that also plays a huge part in the body too. And I'm not sure if or your listeners may be aware, but any SSRIs or antipsychotics, when they're actually given by any psychiatrist or a doctor, people are generally not told that most of them on the market, and I'm actually putting together an ebook, and I'll let everyone know when it's done because it's really, really important. They actually strip out really key nutrients out of our body. So CoQ10, folate, iron, magnesium, vitamin D. So long-term SSRIs and antipsychotics strip out all of those essential things that we need. So even if you're eating food, the SSRIs and the antipsychotics are stripping all of that out. And the thing is too, if we're going to have SSRIs available or antipsychotics for whatever reason, we've got to be able to put a protocol together where food and, extra supplementation is actually being supported in the body and the brain. Because if you don't, then what happens is the longer you're on them, you get more side effects because your body's being stripped out of these key nutrients, and then the doctors will just give you more tablets to treat those side effects without going, hold on, let's look at what it's stripping out. When I look at things who like bipolar or schizophrenia, depending on how long someone's been on meds for, a lot of the time people may be able to come off slowly and wean off, but some people cannot because of the long-term reliance, and also to benzo damage. Sometimes that happens, people are stuck on them. So I always say, let's just start with a carnivore protocol because that's the most powerful one to start with. Then let's get the body and watch the body and where each person lands. Then we can look at what's happening mentally and metabolically, because the thing is too, the body is so inflamed. We're all so inflamed. And once that starts to, slow down and we get blood markers looking a bit different, then we can wean off meds if required. But I, again, will say to people, you do where you feel you're most powerful. But when I work with people, Serena, one of the biggest changes is food becomes only a source of nourishment. It doesn't never, ever, ever becomes again like, oh, I'm going to have an argument with a muffin again on a plate, or, stress myself out about saying, no, I can't. That all disappears because their mental and metabolic health has been put at a higher value, and then they get to choose. So it goes between carnivore, they get to choose, they can go low carb. If they're like, yep, that didn't feel good, I'll go back. Very conscious choice instead of being a very unconscious fitting in and feeling like they're missing out.
One of the things I love best about the carnivore diet, there are many things. I love almost everything about the carnivore diet. One of the things I love the best is that it's the ultimate elimination diet. So you can eliminate everything except the anti-inflammatory foods, eat those for 30 or 60 or 90 days. And then if you want to add something back in, try it and see how you feel. On occasion, I'll eat an artichoke. It's a fun thing I do with my kids. I love to steam them and take the leaves off and dip them in butter. On occasion, not even once a month, I would say once every 2 months, we eat some artichokes together. We sit around the table, we laugh, we dip the leaves in butter, like we have a good time with it. And so although I am a little bit using it for entertainment, but my kids are not carnivores. They're not even really low carb, but they do eat pretty mainstream healthy, I guess you would say. They eat a lot of fruit, not a whole lot of vegetables, quite a bit of meat, but they do eat other things too. But they're older, they're like teenagers and adults. And so if they were younger, I definitely would have forced this on them. But because of their ages, like I'm not willing to sacrifice my relationship with them. So they just kind of have to learn on their own, but they eat pretty healthy. But it is a fun thing that we do. And it was probably 2.5 years before I did that for the first time with them. And I don't really notice anything negative from it. So if I want an artichoke, I'm going to have an artichoke. And then I'm going to go back to not having an artichoke for a month or something. And then if I want to have another artichoke with my kids, I'll have the artichoke with them. You know what I mean? I think there is room for that. And I don't notice anything physically or mentally when I do that.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing. It's all coming back to freedom of choice and being very conscious in your choices without having the guilt or the shame, which so many people are used to doing. We're trying to hide that, even I hear a lot, I went off carnivore. No, you didn't. You just made a choice. What did the choice feedback give you? You just own the feedback. If you felt like crap, well, don't do it again. But don't bring in the, oh, now I feel bad. No, you don't. Just be current, present moment. Be always in the present moment. Very similar with my kids. My son's 19 and, I cringe sometimes, but I'm like, you know what, mate, your gut, you work it out. But my daughter's 14 and she's pretty much 90% carnivore. She'll have some berries and things like that. But, she'll say to me, do you want a blueberry? And I'm like, yeah, I'll put it in my mouth. And I'm like, no, actually, no, I don't. Don't do that. Doesn't taste very good.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's amazing how your taste buds change so much. There's so many things that every now and then I'll say, if I was going to go off carnivore, I think that's something that I would eat. And a salad was one of those things. And I had some salad about a month ago. My husband and I were in town by ourselves and I was light. It was late at night. I don't usually eat late at night. So I got a salad with a little bit of steak on top. And I was like, I mean, it's okay, but it's not something I would choose. Like I would choose more steak
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It all just comes back to being able to be very clear on what outcome am I trying to create here. And, again, in the mainstream, we're told that we can't heal or reverse any kind of mental health or metabolic dysfunctions, right? Which is just nonsense. It's not true. But I think once people really understand how they can feel and know that foundation, that's what I say, like, Carnivore is such a powerful foundation. You always know, wow, I know what that made me feel like. I know what it didn't make me feel like. Where do I lean to? It's just all a choice. Yeah, accept, but also to just really let go of the pressure on yourself to have this physical body look a certain way, or I've got to go on the carnivore diet because I've got an event coming up, or I want to get into, a size 6, or, I had a client the other day. I said, when was the last time you're proud of yourself? When I first started working with her, and she goes, oh, I remember the image that popped up was when I was in a size 6 dress, and it was never about her, just for who she is, right? So it's all understanding what that is, but just being really empowered and taking your agency back for your health and saying no. It's very
Yeah, I
powerful.
feel like that's what Carnivore did for me. It empowered me. And like one meal at a time, you'll get to the end of the day and you'll be like, wow, I did it today. And then you feel empowered and you feel encouraged and you feel like, okay, I think I can do this again tomorrow. And then you get to the end of the week and you stop counting hours. You stop counting the meals and you kind of count the days for a little while. Yeah. And then before you know it, you're counting months and years.
Yes, yes. But you're also realizing in 2 weeks, we're like, oh, there's some big shifts happening. It only takes 2 weeks and you start to feel and just see differently. And yeah, it's really phenomenal. It really, really is.
Really amazing. Natalie, this was incredible. Thank you so much for doing this again with me.
Thank you. No, I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Carnivore Revolution.